you for coming out and joining us tonight. I see a couple of our Anatevkers sitting in the back. Give a wave. And we want to thank our viewers at home who are joining us by webcast. And we hope that you'll join us for the other Fiddler talks in our series. These will take place on Wednesday evenings. The next one is not next week, but the week after, Wednesday, August 8th. We are very proud to present Professor Ruth Wise, the Marty Parrott's Yiddish professor from Harvard University, who will be talking about the literary Tevye as created by Sholem Aleichem. And then a little bit later on, August 22nd, we're presenting Bob Spiato's one-man Sholem Aleichem show called Shalom Sholem, and that'll be here as well. And then on August 29th, we wrap up with a very special evening. We have some original Fiddler cast members from both Broadway and from the film. We've got Austin Pendleton, the original Mottel, Rosalind Harris, who was one of the Zeitels on Broadway and then in the film version, as well as Robert Aberdeen, credited as Robert Burdine, who was one of the Russians and understudied Fiedke as well. So please do join us for those events. Tickets are available through the Museum of Jewish Heritage website, mjhnyc.org. Tickets for Fidler afn Dakh are available from nytf.org. If you haven't already seen it, please get your tickets because they are going fast. Tonight's Fiddler Talk is titled Transforming Fiddler on the Roof to Fidler afn Dakh, and we've got a wonderful panel lined up for tonight. We have our musical director and NYTF artistic director, Zalman Mlotek. We have our choreographer, who did the musical staging for this production as well, Stash Kmiech. We have our esteemed director, Tony and Oscar-winning actor and director, Joel Grey. And our moderator for this evening is broadcast journalist Bud Mishkin. You've probably seen him over his 25 years with New York One. Please welcome Joel Grey, Zalman Mlotek, Stash Kmiech, and Bud Mishkin.
Hi, Bud. Hi, Bud. Who's the kid? This is the baby. The new world, the new life.
Welcome and thank you for being here tonight. Microphone's not on. I know. Is the microphone on? Is this my? Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
I was born in a small village. Joel, let's start with you. How did this concept first get brought to your attention?
This gentleman here and I became friends, and one night he called me and he said, I'm going to do Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish. Would you like to play Tevye? And or, I think it was just or direct. And I said, that's a very interesting idea. Let me think about it. And I had all of one night. And I called him in the morning. I said, I'm on. I'm in. I have always adored Fiddler on the Roof. And I somehow felt that even though I didn't speak Yiddish, I knew what this play was about. I'd seen so many performances of it and adored it and admired it. And I spoke to Hal Prince, who is a good friend, and he said he was going to call Zalman and tell him that I should direct it. And that all happened in 20 hours. And we started to talk about how to do it. And he's the motor. He's the man who makes everything happen here. And
Not quite. Thank you.
You didn't grow up, you didn't speak Yiddish, but you grew up around Yiddish being part of funny songs with your father.
There was no Yiddish spoken in my home. Would you do me a favor, Muddle? I think the baby's wet. Careful. Careful!
That's a long way to go. That's a great punchline. So the fact that your dad had sung,
My father was very fluent and he loved Yiddish. My mother had no interest in it at all. And it was never spoken in our house, except those occasional times when they didn't want us to understand. I mean, that's so classic, right? But my dad adored Yiddishkeit. And he came from a family that did, in fact, speak it. And the Yiddish music was something that I heard from, very, very early on. My dad was a great clarinet and saxophone player, legitimate, and played classical music. And always at any sort of mitzvah or, wonderful moment in a celebration, my dad would always pull out his clarinet and make the most magical Yiddish klezmer music. I mean, he was a great, great player, and I loved it when he did. And the next thing I knew is I grew up and did not want to play a piano, did not want to play any instrument, but I saw a theater performance of children, and I thought to myself, and I said to my mother, I want to do that. And so at age 9, I was already a devoted, committed actor, not a singer, not a dancer. And the theater was my dream, and it still is. And somehow, acting in all the things that I've done over these years, this was so natural for me. Because of my dad, probably, and the love of him and his passion and his pride in being an outspoken Jew. Because what he tried to do with his parodies of hit songs, I don't think he ever knew it. In my opinion, I think he was trying to give Jewish people their own connection with the hit parade. David Crockett, the king of Delancey Street. Herring boats are coming with bagels and lox. Herring boats are coming, wird stinken heint bei Nacht. You better hurry up, you better leif. Herring's kosher, aber shrimp is treif. So that was how I learned any Yiddish, but it was not speakable. It was sort of unspeakable.
Zalman, you grew up completely immersed in it. Your dad worked at the Forward, the Workman's Circle. Your mom was involved in publishing. So is there a point, you went to Juilliard years ago, is there a point early on where you thought, the language these characters in Fiddler on the Roof would have been speaking would have been Yiddish, there should be a show, and it should be in New York.
Well, I have to say that the impetus for the Yiddish production here was the Israeli production. My parents, they called my father the address for Yiddish in America, because anything that was going on with Yiddish, he was involved with on some level. So he received the recording that was made in Israel in 65, 65 or 66? 65. And we heard the Shmuel Rudensky's recording of Tevye and Fiddler, and it was then that we had already loved Fiddler for a year, having heard it in 64. Now to hear it in Yiddish was very exciting. So it has been in the recesses of my mind for many, many years to be able to do it. But, it's because of my partner and CEO, Chris Massimine, who undertook this massive production massive production. No, I just need, when you say I'm the motor here, I appreciate it, but there's a team of people, that not only the staff of the theater,
Sure.
but of the museum that have made this production happen. So,
Stash, you are considered the foremost American authority on Polish culture and dance. Your folks are Polish immigrants, and you have background in Fiddler on the Roof as well.
Yes.
So when you initially come to the show, when was that? And the fact that you were steeped in kind of Polish culture and Polish dance, did that help you initially as far as the first time you were connected to the show, and then when you were brought on for this show?
Okay, so you want to talk about this show in particular, yes?
I gave you a lot there.
Yeah, you gave me a lot.
Let's go
You gave me a lot.
chronologically. What was your first connection to Fiddler on the Roof?
The first connection is when I did a national tour with Theodore Bickel. It was a...
Heard of him?
Yeah.
Heard of him?
I did... Oh, thank you for years. It's 1994. So I did a two-year tour then, and then I did another two-year tour with him in 2000. And then 6 other subsequent productions, and I have a lot of Fiddler mileage as far as a performer. And then after that, I also directed and choreographed it several times. And so I came with all of that knowledge of the Robbins original. And coming to this production, when I met with Joel and Zalman early on, they wanted something a little bit different, and it wasn't just the Yiddish, it was other aspects of it, really a concentration on realism. And this was a real village. Even though Robbins did that to an extent, this was going to be even further into the concept of realism. So with one foot in tradition and one foot in realism, I approached it in ways of embellishing, adding layers onto the Robbins, and taking my background not only in Polish dance and culture, but also in various aspects of Jewish tradition, and infusing more of that into the production, and to add those layers of the traditional customs, even though a lot of that is already in the musical, adding even further layers onto it.
So for some of us, we might look at it all as, be it Russian, be it Ukrainian, be it Polish, as all Slavic.
Yes.
But are there delineations? So the knowledge of the Polish culture and the Polish dance, would it pertain to something like this, which is taking place in Ukraine in the late 19th century, or are those apples and oranges?
They're not exactly apples and oranges, but in addition to the Polish background, I have a background in Hungarian, Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian dance, and all that. So I do know the differences. And also, as we talked about earlier, the boundaries of Poland, were in constant flux. And so what was Poland one day, maybe, Ukraine the next or whatever. And there were 2 areas of Poland that I did a lot of research, which was Helm. You might have heard of, Yes, and there is actually a place. And I went around to villagers, people, inhabitants, and with a camcorder and a tape recorder, and I recorded all of this so I could document it and then present it as a suite of songs and dances from that area. There's another area. So anyway, so it's all of that. I think my thirst for knowledge, you know, when I was in Poland studying at a university, ethnography and folk dance and folklore, I made it a point to travel to a synagogue to find out more, because during communist Poland, there wasn't a lot of that information coming out. So
Not an easy question also to ask at the Chamber of Commerce either.
Yeah.
Where's the local synagogue here?
So I did find out a lot, and also I had instructors that I picked their brains and found out even more. So it's that constant thirst for knowledge applied to my love and knowledge of Fiddler that I was able to, as I said, one foot in tradition, one foot in the realism of our concept.
When Stash was talking about the notion of boundaries changing, I told him the story earlier that my grandfather on my father's side was a Polish immigrant from Suwałki, Poland, way up in the northeast corner, came here by himself. Family all stayed behind, letters through the 20s and the 30s, and then in 1939, the letters stopped. But years later, as his grandson, I would ask him, Grandpa, you say you're from Poland, you say you're from Russia, you know, which was it? I was from upstate New York, it didn't change. New York, New Jersey, what did I know? And I'd say, you say you're from Poland, you say you're from Russia, which was it? And he said, sometimes it was Poland, sometimes it was Russia. And the punchline was always, didn't matter, they all hated us. So, his positive outlook on the world. As you're preparing this, or as you make the phone call to Joel, and the initial stages, is there a notion of what you thought the biggest trap might be, or the biggest hurdle to overcome in staging Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish?
The Yiddish. We knew that we were dealing with one of the most beloved musicals written in America. We knew that it was one of the most successful musicals. But the challenge of conveying the story honestly from actors who didn't necessarily know Yiddish was the biggest challenge. I knew that when our casting director, Jamie Beth Margulis, put the ad out, she received over 2,500 inquiries for 26 roles. Then she and her team whittled it down to 700. We saw 700 actors. And these were, of course, most of them, the vast majority did not know Yiddish, but they were Broadway caliber actor, singer, dancers, fantastic talent. And so when you asked about the greatest challenge, you know, I knew by asking Joel, it would be a theatrically rich and deep presentation. After he then put his incredible team together, the design team, and then they presented us with the concept, we were in tears. You know, we were so moved by his concept of how he was going to transform this stage, this lecture hall, into a stage, into a village. But the actors was the greatest challenge. And I'm just going to fast forward because we're so blessed with the 26 people on our stage. We have an incredible. We are. You know, as I've mentioned many times in articles, 24 of them, you know, really don't speak Yiddish. Several of them have performed with us before. 3 of them are native Yiddish, not native, but have learned Yiddish and speak fluently. But the vast majority learned the Yiddish in the 4 weeks of rehearsal. And yes, it is a wow. And because it's not just learning the Yiddish, it's learning the other texts. It's learning what the other person, and the brilliant way that Joel would stage the rehearsals, he would first have them do the scenes in English so that everyone.
So I'd understand.
No, and so that the
Know what to tell them.
and so the actor knew exactly what he was doing, and then Muttel Didner, and Sabina Bruckner, the Yiddish team would then hear the Yiddish, and then we would go through it. So, but it's a tremendous tribute to the actors who, to this day, consciously go over the Yiddish in their heads before they come out, and that's why it's so believable. So that was the biggest challenge.
Joel, as a director, because they've just learned this language, a little bit more leeway in terms of, if an actor drops a line or doesn't know a line by a particular time where you think that actors should know the line, it's a little bit more cushion as opposed to if they were doing a show in English.
I was never the expert about the Yiddish. They could have been speaking Turkish. But I always had somebody nearby who was very, very aware of the spoken language and that it be spoken correctly. I just thought of something today that made me laugh. It was that this theater has a reputation that if the actors are not speaking good Yiddish, that the audience talks to them. And so I think that all of our actors are terrified. And it turns out I have not heard one word back at the actors ever.
No, I saw the show this afternoon, and no words back, just laughter. Laughter ahead of the points of the show that are particularly well known, and then other little jewels in the show that are not quite as well known. The whole notion of a great book, to me, it's largely about a rhythm. And of course, growing up in a household where I heard a zillion times, it's no great honor either, or you had a bad week, why should I suffer? We weren't even talking about the show. Even as a non-Yiddish speaker, once you start getting into it, is there some sense of, wow, this language in the show really has a rhythm to it?
It took on a life of its own. That's all I can say, because I don't know that anybody's ever quite done it this way. And just put the word out, no talking back to the actors. I like to keep them safe.
As a choreographer, I mean, look, if you're going to choreograph a chorus line, okay, that's pressure. But then there are, in terms of theater and famous plays, famous musicals, and famous scenes from famous musicals, to life, l'chaim, has got to be up there. And so when you know that you're going to have a scene that's been seen once or twice by the people in the audience, albeit not in Yiddish, what's that pressure like when you're going into that and trying to do it justice, but also trying to do something different as well?
Well, I think because I had such an intimate knowledge of Robbins, I was the one that would know how to break the rules, as opposed to, not knowing it at all and just wanting to create something brand new without knowing what the source is. So I knew what it was, and then, as I said earlier, that I was able to embellish, add layers, and put different things in. I put a lot more Russian dancing in, and I'm sure, if any of my dancers are out there, I'm sure they thank me for it every night. Because there's a...
For the record, there was some talk about maybe the Russian dance will be done during the course of this evening, and I'd just like to say that I will not be performing the Russian dance. Go ahead.
During the auditions, it was a unique type of dancer because I said to them, no amount of training is going to prepare you for what is going to happen to your thighs doing all this low dancing. And, I heard that the original production, they were lying out in the hallways like it was a barracks, of wounded soldiers because, their legs were bothering that much. And having danced it, I can tell you by that last show of the week, you're definitely feeling those thighs and legs and can't walk downstairs. You can walk upstairs, but you can't walk down them. It just kind of gives out. But so I added much more because I wanted a real heavy dose of all that Russianness. And coming from a folk dance background, I wanted to put more of it in there. But I also knew the points of that it needed to touch. And so I didn't reinvent the wheel, but I gave it a whole lot of grease. So.
We now look at it, and you're playing to sold-out audiences every day and every night. As you get into the process, Joel, is there any notion, is this going to fly? Will this happen? Will audiences come? Do you have to deal with the element of doubt, or were you pretty sure once you got into it that, no, this is going to hit?
Doubt.
Next question. So,
I mean, it was risky for everybody. I mean, it's. Use the mic? Oh, okay. To play with a perfect piece in the first place, and then I think that there is certainly anti-Semitism in our world as we live it today. And you wonder whether or not this is something that we should be, in fact, celebrating who we are and where we come from. And will that be accepted in that way? When you look at the world view of the dreadful immigration situation and the European, I mean, it's just horrifying. And I find that we are celebrating Yiddishkeit in this production, and that audiences want it and hold it and are ready at the very beginning of the play when they hear Tevye say whatever, Meshuggah. I mean, and you're home.
in some of the countries where there were Anatevkas, there does seem to be a drive to kind of go back to the future, and also people are leaving Anatevkas all over the world still for a whole variety of reasons. Is that something that you try and get across, or tried to get across to the cast and everybody working on the show, that it's not just a great show, which it is, and it's not just an iconic show, which it is, but there's meaning in our history, and there's meaning right now as far as people leaving homes for some better land?
I don't think people asked any of those questions. I mean, if they did, it was purely internal. I didn't get any resistance or not even a question about it.
Not so much resistance, but just that the show is a current show and has real meaning and real legs. And like the old, to paraphrase the old advertisement, you don't need to be Jewish to love
I think
Fiddler
it was
on the
so
Roof.
clear from everyone from the first reading, when we first read it, when we first heard the first reading in Yiddish, it was so clear to us all, actors, producer, everyone, how timely and how special it was for us to be doing it today. Yeah, but the natural, and this is really to Joel's credit. This, when you ask about doubts, okay, I had my own worries as a shtickle producer here, part of, could we present this icon of a musical without the sets and, big dance, big cast and big orchestra, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when Joel and Beowulf, the set designer, and Peter Kaczorowski, this lighting designer, and Annie Ward, the costume designer, presented us with the first rendering of what this would look like in a little box in Annie's studio, we sat there with tears in our eyes. I mean, I sat there just looking at this and saying, oh my God, what else do we need besides this incredible text, incredible message, and this world that Joel was committed to bring forth in the most honest, in the most natural, as he says, way. And, he did it. They did it. So,
Yeah. The word iconic has been used several times, and rightfully so, about this show. And yet a show is a lot of work. And so do you have to kind of break through that notion of, okay, we're doing Fiddler in Yiddish, we're doing Fiddler in Yiddish in New York, we're doing Fiddler in Yiddish in New York at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. We have steps we need to learn. For us as an audience, there can be that, boy, how meaningful this is. But did you have to kind of break through it all to the actors like, look, we can focus on the bigger picture at some point. At this point, we need to work on this scene.
There was excitement. There was excitement from all these non-Yiddish speaking actors and non-Jewish actors. Were just totally committed from the beginning. They had, how many people? 700 that auditioned for something like this? There was a tremendous excitement about it that I don't even know if I can explain.
So I have a bit of a different perspective. I wasn't doubtful. I saw, I think it was maybe the second or third day of rehearsal, I staged Tradition, the opening. And from that point, I knew that this was going to work because we had a village. They were all very individual people, and they were telling a story. And I know when, before everyone else from the creative team saw the designs, Joel brought me to see it first. And I think he was wanting to break it to me because it was not going to be all of, what I'm used to seeing, a house of this. And I saw it, and I took it in, and I said, it's going to challenge me. It's a challenge for me, but I'm ready to meet that challenge. And then my thought was that we can tell the story with all the richness of everything else that's involved, that we don't have to have all of the literal, houses. And even there's a point where they walk in and out of the tailor shop or the house, and they normally would kiss the mezuzah. And we don't have a doorway, but I insisted that they needed to be kissing the mezuzah, because that at least told us where we were and who we were. And so, there are those aspects of it, and as I said, it was a challenge to me, but to also hear the richness of the language and knowing this show without even having to look at the transliteration, even though I did, because there are little changes here and there that do surprise you. You could just feel it, the rhythm. You could feel the rhythm and the inflection of what the actors were conveying. And so we had our village that way.
If you haven't seen the show, I'm not breaking any new ground here, but suffice it to say, there's a lot of miming of kissing the mezuzah. Right? a lot. It's like, and eventually, oh, that's what they're doing. I got it. Okay. Was there one particular scene or song that created the greatest challenge for you? To be specific, in this production of Fiddler on the Roof. It could be something from 20, 30 years ago. No?
The whole thing.
Yeah, the whole thing. Okay.
I have one.
Good.
The dream sequence. So
Oh, do you want to talk about that?
Sure, I'll talk about it. um, we Joel had an idea of a shadow, a screen, and he kind of presented it to me at a production meeting, and I was like, whoa, this is something new. This is something I wish I never had done, and so I started wrapping my mind around it and embracing it. And then there were a lot of people that were saying, oh, it can't happen, it's going to be a production nightmare and all that. And I started figuring out how it could work and how and those of you that haven't seen it yet, I won't give it away, but it's just a unique telling of the dream, and I love it. And it's, I'm actually really pleased with what came out of it. But it was a challenge.
It definitely works. So when the original was first, auditions were first being held for the original, and we're talking about like probably 64, all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're in New York. You're an actor in New York at that point. This is a couple years before Cabaret, okay? That's a show that Joel was in, by the way. I don't know if you heard. I'm being told there was a film also, apparently. Do you remember like hearing about it? Did you get you? Okay.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was friendly with Harold Prince, and I went to Washington to see it before it came to Broadway.
Was there ever any chance of auditioning for it?
For me?
Yeah.
To be in it?
Yeah.
No. Too gentile.
Did you want to be in it?
I guess I would have thought that playing Mottel was a great role, and we have a wonderful actor as Mottel. No, I didn't really think that there was anything for me in it. It was about Zero and Robbins and Bach and Harnick. It was just something else, but I just adored it. And they did not know that first night in Washington, nobody expected it to be successful or as successful. And I remember seeing Molly Pecan in
Milk and Honey?
Milk and Honey. And I remember there were some Israeli things in it, and I remember there was a lot of kind of moving around in your seat. It didn't feel like safe to have Yiddish things out there for the general public. And but that was not the case with Fiddler because the artistry was so amazing.
You know, this is a question a little bit away from Fiddler, but you and I have had many conversations. Joel has a great one-man show called Up Close and Personal, and part of that show is an interview, which I've been blessed to be able to do. We did the show a couple of years ago in his hometown of Cleveland at the 100th anniversary of the great Cleveland Playhouse, which he referenced before. And before that, we did it in Toronto. And what I find, amongst many things about your career fascinating, is that during those years, you came, as you've said, pretty close to, I'm giving it up. It's not working out. This is, of course, before Cabaret. And for all of us, the notion of you not being in this world, I mean, obviously we're all the better for it. I'm fascinated by what got you through those moments when you were wondering in the early 60s, like, is this really going to work for me?
Read my book.
Now?
Tonight.
Okay, tonight, all right. Zalman, we talked about how you grew up around this music, and it was in your home, and so I guess it was just natural to hear it, and people coming over to the house and singing it. So when you met other kids, young people for whom it was not so natural, was it kind of like, what, you guys don't have Yiddish music in your house?
I I grew up in a Yiddish ghetto in the Bronx. It was the amalgamated houses in the Bronx. And my friends were children of survivors. I went to Yiddish camps. I went to a Yiddish camp called Camp Hemshech. I know that there are some, which Hemshech means continuity. It was created by Holocaust survivors who wanted to instill in their children a sense of the culture that they had lost. And it was in existence from the late 50s to the early 70s.
Wow.
So it was a Yiddish-speaking summer camp. I mean, we were all American-born, but most of us, but Yiddish was the second language. So our performances were in Yiddish. The announcements in the morning were in Yiddish. So I grew up in this world, so that was the world that I had grown up with. In addition to going to public school and going to afternoon Yiddish school, the workman circle schools.
So you've all been around this, you've been around Yiddish forever. You've been around, or Fiddler has been on your radar for a long time. Same for you. You're in the production now. It's going great. Is there something in particular that you've learned about the show that is new to you, that you hadn't thought of in all the prior experiences, in all the prior productions, in all the thinking about it, that perhaps during the course of the rehearsals or during the course of the shows, all of a sudden something dawns on you about the show that you hadn't thought before?
I'm going to jump in quickly. I'm humbled every night to conduct this score. It is one of the most beautifully constructed scores that I've ever had the privilege to work on. Having heard it for so many years, and unfortunately heard it, in dentist offices as well as elevators, you forget the genius of Jerry Bach and Sheldon Harnick in bringing to life emotions through their music, through their musicality of the text.